Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's webinar, The Power of Your Story, Building Identity, Embracing Risk, and Creating Change. I'm Sharon Spurlock. I'm the Senior Director of Family Education at the St. Louis Arc, and I'm so excited to be here with one of my favorite colleagues, who for the first time I'm going to be able to introduce as Dr. Worth. So without further ado, I'm so very delighted to introduce you to Dr. Christopher Robin Judson Worth, one of my favorite people to work with. Chris and I have known each other a long time, from the time he was a community organizer, and then through a variety of coalitions and collaboratives. And he has spent the last few years pursuing his own PhD at the University of Missouri St. Louis, while also being an adjunct professor for the Office of Inclusive Post-Secondary Education. So we're very honored to have you with us here today, Chris. Is there anything you want to say before I turn on the presentation?
No, I'm just really excited to be here and really excited to share share what I've learned um, and start the story. My name is Chris Worth, and um, tonight I'll use this intro slide to sort of say that um, the work that I'm going to share with you tonight is work that I've been doing for um, about 5 years intensely, um, and it centers around um, uh, that idea of story development, right? Um, so tonight I will um, intersplice some of my own story, but I want to start out by saying that I'm coming to this work with a lot of privilege, right? But I also, even with the PhD behind my name, had a lot of struggle, right? So, my life is a balance of that. So if you are an advocate and you think to yourself, I can never do what Chris Worth has done, or you're a parent and you're thinking to yourself, well, Chris is a special case, right? I would ask you to pause for a moment as we move through the evening and remember that, and you'll hear more about this, but I have been uh, in the middle of struggle. I understand the power of it in both positive and negative ways. So I just want to use this intro slide to sort of state that, and also let you know that even though you might think that I'm coming at this uh, with my PhD mallet out, right? I'm really tonight going to focus on trying to make it as conversational as possible, right? So don't be worried. I'll explain. I want you to take a moment, and I really want you to close your eyes. And of course, I can't see you, right? But I want you to be with yourself for a moment. Close your eyes and think about who you are now, and think about all the things that you have had to go through, whether you're 1945 or 68, right? We have stories that make us who we are. Take a moment and think about those chapters and think about what you had to do to become who you are today. And I would venture to guess that everyone has had to step outside of their comfort zone. Everyone has had to do things that they are not comfortable with doing at first. But in doing that, you're writing on your book of life. So I want you to think about that. And I'm going to give us just a minute. I have my eyes closed and I'm thinking about everything that I had to do to become who I am today. So think about even the bad stuff, even the not so good stuff, right? We don't always like to think about this, but even the not so good stuff has made us who we are, right? Now, that doesn't take away the trauma of it, but I have a tattoo on my arm, and the tattoo reads Tante Belle Cose. It's Italian for all the beautiful things. And what that means is even the struggle that we might be going through right now, that we might have gone through as children who were denied full access, right? What we might go through when we deal with ageism as we age, right? Even that is adding to who we are. The idea of thinking about all of the things that we write on our book, right? So many people with um, um, disabilities um, are not allowed to write on their book for themselves. Still. So when I was younger, I was fully institutionalized. Now, what that means is that I did not get access to a lot of like reading, writing, and arithmetic, or like stretching my mind. Where I was institutionalized, it was very nice, right? Right? It had lots of therapy. The place had lots of therapy built into it, but there was not a lot of chance and not a lot of choice built into my life, my early life, right? When I was about to make a mistake, um, all of the time, the expert would swoop in and fix it, right? I did not have the consequence of making a bad choice until I was adopted at 11. So that dignity of risk piece, that dignity of risk piece is so important, and we're gonna talk about it throughout the hour with you that I have. But I want you to understand that having the ability to make choice is risk. Having the ability to make choice is risk. Now, I'll also use the larger we word, WE. That means when I say we, I'm talking about other scholars, right? So, part of my PhD was to read lots and lots of books and articles about risk and about choice and what that does for the mind, not just the mind of neurotypical regularly ambulating people, but for every mind, right? So I spent 3 years um, really diving into those things. And then I spent the rest of the time, the rest of the 5 years, sorting that stuff out, right? And what I learned was that this dignity of risk piece allows people to really begin to shape their own story. And we know that remember what I mean by we know that it changes the mind to be able to make choices. So in my life, I was denied choice, right? Literally denied it. Sometimes because of safety concern, with quotes around that, right? And those are valid concerns. But what ended up happening is that when I was adopted by a prominent family from West Virginia, right? And they noticed that the paperwork that followed me from the institution wasn't very accurate. They seemed they began to challenge me to make choices. And you know what I would do at 11 years old? I would break down. I would cry. I sometimes kicked and screamed when I was asked to choose my own clothing, right? Because someone had always done that for me, right? Think about that. My mind was closed. My mind had to be tooled into thinking about choice, tooled into thinking about risk. Now, was I talking about the risk of of you know of driving a fast car at 11, right? My car too fast? No. Was I talking about um some sort of other terrible choice? No. Like my parents weren't going to let me because they loved me make I was going to be under their tutelage within this, and I was, right? And we'll find that people with disabilities recognize that that support is important, right? But what had to happen is that I had to sort of be forced to begin writing on the page of my story, writing on the page of my book on my own. And it started with simple choices that I exploded at. So I really want to help people with disabilities know the power of their story. And that comes all the way back from what Sharon referenced as my work as a community organizer. We are trained to let people realize that they have their own story already, right? I want to find ways um, 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 for people to start writing on their own story and take control, right? Too many times we still have older folks with disabilities who are scared to make a choice, right? They look at their supporter to make a choice, and that's okay. Remember, that's not to sound like Seinfeld, but that's okay to sometimes rely on your support system. But too often it becomes a crutch. So I want to help people know that they can control their own life, right? And I want to I really especially after this reading, especially after these years of sort of gestating on this. Gestating means sort of cooking it up in my brain, right? I really understand that risk taking is a human right, right? That actually makes us human. Think about that. When we are not allowed to take risk, we are we're sort of institutionalizing ourselves without the brick and mortar, right? I hear from a lot of people that they are risk averse, and I question that every time, especially able-bodied people say they are risk averse. If you had to come to work today, you took a level of risk. If you got a promotion, you've taken levels of risk to get to where you are, right? Often able-bodied people don't see it that way because it's so natural to them, right? That they can take a risk. I want it to become as natural for um for a non-neurotypicals as it is for neurotypicals, if that makes sense. And so I have 2 degrees in art. Do you think my parents were happy when I decided to go to art school? They were a little bit weary of that. But I really think that creativity became a window, became a door for me to become who I am today, right? And for those of you who don't think you're creative, um, 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 I would call that into question because, as we're going to hear, um, just living takes a level of creativity. Defining yourself takes a level of creativity. In order to really dive into these stories, right? Dive into the idea that a story makes us who we are, right? I asked these research questions during my PhD, right? Um, um, what helps people build their own life story, right? So I tell, and Sharon's gonna love this. I tell my 19-year-olds when I was teaching them, I can't believe that's over, that I've turned a chapter in my life, not over, but over for now, right? Um, I tell them that they already have a story, that I am there to help them find it sometimes, right? Or define it, or sharpen it as their instructor, but and add to it, right? Because I'm 40 something years old. I'm well removed from my 20s, so I am there to support their growth. But what helps people build their own life story? That was my first question. How does taking risk and making choices help us grow? Now, I want to reinforce, and I'm gonna say this throughout our time together. Um, that simple choice. I'm not talking about, you know, um, diving out of a plane without a parachute, but choice can change our minds, right? And I am disability positive. I think of my disability as a part of my gifts and my talents. I wouldn't be the same person without it. But being able to take risks has helped me grow into my cerebral palsy and my other unseen disabilities, right? So I've had to I wanted to think about how does taking risk and making choices help us grow. Okay, and finally, how does art or creativity um, um, help us begin to see our full selves, right? Um, I want you to when we say art, because there'll be a ton of people who um, there'll be a ton of people who don't think of themselves as creative in this room because in this country, in this culture, um, it's not really something we embrace. So think of it as creativity. You don't have to be an artist. Think about think about it as choosing my own piece of music, right? 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 Or choosing to eat certain delicious foods, right? Um, Sharon and I have have been in um, New Orleans together, and um, um, her mom had some turtle soup. Turtle soup would not be my choice, right? But her mom loved it. It's about that decision, right? And that can be creative. We just don't think of it that way because it's an everyday thing. I kind of gave this away, but I spent about probably 3.5 years just reading everything that I could. Reading everything that I could. And what I came up with in that reading over and over again, supported by other people who have thought about these things, is that self-determination, being able to carve my own path, and dignity of risk, they actually go hand in hand. They aren't separate from each other. Now, do I have to be Rembrandt in my self-determination? Or do I have to be do I have to make the most outlandish um 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 risk-taking um uh choices? No, right? I'm gonna reinforce that. Sorry about all the ums. But the the thing is, in order to be self-determined, we have what we being that whole, this is a picture of a bunch of books in a library. What everything I read suggested was that just making a basic choice and building it up over time, right? I don't flip out about choosing my underwear anymore, right? I did that when I was 11. I acted more like a 7-year-old because I had been institutionalized. But I, today even, have to build up what I'm going to do next. I have to think about it. And one thing that my research pointed out is that because self-determination and the right to take risks go hand in hand, there is also a component in there um, where we have to build in time to evaluate. Now, many of the so um, this presentation is based on my dissertation. So, and based on my dissertation research, and many of the folks that participated in the research with me, we'll talk about them in full a little bit later. But they all virtually had a plan for how they were going to take their next risk. Sometimes it had to do with art. Sometimes it had to do with creativity. But they all had a kind of plan. Everyone that I worked with to get my PhD, right? All the people with disabilities that participated in my study. So once I saw that these two things, self-determination and the right to take risks, went hand in hand, I started building my research around that. And what I mean by research is I wanted to find questions, or I wanted to find, sometimes they were questions. So I wanted to find answers to the questions that I presented earlier, right? So I had to do some exploring of that. I'm sure that everybody understands what that means. So once I figured out that the books were saying that were reflecting for me that they actually go hand in hand, then I started building my project to look at people's stories, understanding that you can't separate self-determination and the right to take risks, right? Now, the risks don't have to be huge, but there has to be a lot of risk in there. And I'm gonna be a little bit controversial, Sharon, here. I'm not cussing yet, but what I'm gonna say is that in order to be truly self-determined, we have to take some level of risk in our lives. Lots of able-bodied people, some of you parents might be looking at yourselves saying, how's that? I'm risk averse. I make a plan for everything. Well, but I would argue, and I said this a couple slides ago, that we're taking risks even when we don't even realize we are. And that's how privileged we can be in that. In order to really get at what the literature was saying to me, the literature is, what I mean by the literature is everything I read. The WE, right? I started thinking about the individual person with a disability's story as the top of the house. And there's a lot of great songs where people sing from the mountaintop, right? Sharon, I don't know if she's ever been on a mountaintop, but she sings from the top of a stage out onto an audience when she sings, right? Well, I started thinking about people needing to be able to sing with the clarity of their own passions, their own story. And the way we get to that, the way we get to be able to sing is that, so on this slide, there's a sort of picture of a house, and I've already explained the roof of the house. It's all the voices. The door of the house, I don't know why the door is right there, but I'm not going to argue. The door of the house, having access to telling your story, to singing your song, is taking risks, right? And risks, and writing your story, being able to write your story over time, right? The Sharon, I'm picking on her a lot, but she invited me. So the Sharon who is the Sharon today isn't quite the Sharon she was when she was 20, right? But she's had the freedom to become who she is. So one of the windows of the house is about that being able to sing is what leads us to being the most free people we can be. So the walls of my research um, were all based on the on people who think about how self-determination works and how young people, and I'll explain why I'm saying young people in a minute, how young people define themselves, how they become who they're going to become. And what the literature taught me, what the big we taught me, is that really we're all on a journey, right? And yeah, we probably hear that in many of our faith traditions, right? But the literature showed me that we're on a journey and that being on a journey equals freedom. Being allowed to be on that journey equals freedom. Now, is my journey the same journey as Hannah Satterwhite's? Hannah works for the Ark. No. Like, I have cerebral palsy. My wife has cerebral palsy. My wife is not Hannah Satterwhite. My wife is Juliet Sollyworth, but our cerebral palsy is very different, right? And it has affected our story in different ways. So, our way toward freedom might be very different, should be very different. Does everybody get that? Okay, so just to tell you a little bit about who helped me in building this idea. Once I read all those books and all those articles, I wanted to see if those questions I gave earlier if they had some truth to them. So, in order to explore that, I recruited people between the ages of 18 and 31. They were folks with developmental, intellectual, or learning disabilities, right? In the case of learning disabilities, it could encapsulate many of those other types of disabilities. And I tried my best to have a diverse sample size. What sample size means is the people I invited to be involved, I wanted them to not be all white and male like Chris Worth, right? Like Dr. Worth. Can't believe I can say that. So I asked them, I found a few that were interested, and I asked them to ask more people. And that's how I built a team to explore the development of story. What counted in the minds of folks between the ages of 18 and 31? What helped them become or write on their story, right? In their journey of becoming, right? And I my youngest my youngest participant happened to be 20, and my oldest participant was 28. I had 3 people who identified as male and 3 people who identified as female. The things I looked for, like, what do you look for? I can imagine that you're all sitting at home over your coffee or your stew or your chicken, thinking, or lasagna. I love lasagna. I'm thinking, well, how did he know how a person um was choosing their own path? Like, what's important for a person to choose their own path? And these are some of the things I look for. How do I know? How did I know as a researcher if a person was taking action for themselves? Um, um, right? And how did I know that there was an increase in belief in themselves? So I looked at all of these factors, knowing who you are, understanding, under choosing your own path, knowing who you are. So could I see that they were developing or had developed a strong sense of self, right? Um, um, Understanding your true potential, right? So when I was 20, I didn't always have an idea of my true potential. So what I ended up really looking for was, can I see the development of these things? Didn't have to be perfect, right? Being an emerging adult, being a person who's emerging is difficult. Giving birth, I've never done it, but it's difficult, right? So, and you could argue that we give birth to ourselves multiple times in a life course if we're allowed to, right? And we become, right? So, can I see a person um, building strong skills, um, um, making independent choices, um, um, uh, grow? Can I see people growing in healthy ways, right? And really, the way because my job as a researcher was to listen to their story, right? They would often tell me what they didn't think was healthy or what they thought was healthy, right? So I just looked for those moments in my life. Um, I so even after I was adopted, no one thought I would go to college. Like, I'm not even sure my parents were thinking about college for me because I only started school at 11. I I could not read a clock or really read fluently, and I still have some fluency issues. Even as a PhD, I use a lot of screen readers, um, and things like that. And my wife will read a chapter to me if I'm too tired. Um, um, so, um, like the things uh, that emerge for most emerging adults, those people between the ages of 18 and 31, um, they emerged kind of late for me. So I like to tell Dr. April Register, like, I felt these things. I didn't always have names for them. In college was the first time that I was really aware of the self. I had to really like force myself to, and many of you think, well, Chris Worth is so social, but there was a time because even though my parents were big into making me independent, that had some um, that had some weird drawbacks because I didn't think I could ask people for help. Right? I didn't. So I spent my first year in college really stinking, like physically stinking, right? Because I would, by the time I got back out of the bathtub after putting myself in, I was so sweaty I might as well take a bath again. I didn't know how to ask for help. So all of these things were super late. All of the things on the screen here, were super late in coming to me. Were super late in coming to me. And I said to Dr. April Register, she was the chair of my committee. I said, many times I was just unaware of, um, like I just needed to force myself to do things. And we're gonna see in several of the vignettes coming up. Can we go to the vignettes? So the sculptor, 24 years old, local to our community, right? Was told many times by the system that people in high school, people with disabilities can't do this, people with disabilities can't do that. So in his college experience, really having experiences like being allowed to make mistakes, being allowed to try things is still brand new to him at 24. He uses a communication device. When I had him for class, I don't think he'd mind me saying this, he would barely use the communication device. But his experience has really taught him that he needs to ask if he needs a word put in the system. In his what's the AC in the communication device. So his growth has really taken off because he's had to kind of force himself to be out, to ask for help, to advocate. All right. Um, could, um, could you Sharon, could you read that just read that the quote?
The sculptor has a disposition for new adventures. The sculptor sees himself as a person who is not afraid to try new things. His mom said that the sculptor is always willing to try a new adventure. The sculptor smiled in a very big way after his mom made that statement.
Okay, I think that's a perfect segue into questions.
You've got people emotional as you often do, which I think is exciting.
Yes.
Uh, and the quote that stood out for another one of our attendees was institutionalizing ourselves without the brick and mortar. Where do you see that happening on a regular basis, Chris? I love that phrase too.
I think it's when um, I'm often in spaces with older advocates, so older than the people I studied, and they'll be asked a question, and their immediate reaction is um, to look at someone else, even though they know the answer to the question,
Mhm.
even though um, they are active in their community and really living out some um, community living kind of ideals, they still don't trust themselves.
Mhm.
They still rely, and like I said earlier, not to be too Seinfeldy, but that's okay to rely on your system, right? One of the findings was that people between the ages of 18 and 31, they really they have because I giggle because I was so rebellious. They have a real need to see their parents as supporters, right? In a way that I didn't when I was
Mhm.
their age, right? So that's okay, but we still too often um, keep people there, keep people frozen in a way.
we have another question about you're inspiring somebody to think about how do we start if a parent or a staff person is supporting somebody who isn't used to making their own decision. Would you recommend starting with something as simple as choosing your own clothes every day?
Yes, because Sharon, it literally changes our mind. It broadens our mind, right? Um, in a way that to make a choice, in a way that is physiological too. It's amazing.
Something I think you said that was powerful too. I think sometimes when somebody reacts negatively when we're asking them to make a choice, we assume then that they don't want to make a choice. But what
Yeah.
I heard you say is that that was part of your growth process was to have to go through the discomfort of making choices and get through it.
So I talk about this philosopher named Kierkegaard, and Kierkegaard, he was so funny, but he focused a lot on like he was really humorous. I'm not kidding. Um, but he focused a lot on sometimes it's kind of painful to be human, and we need that to become our richer selves,
Mhm.
right? Sometimes we need that stretch. There's a boy, or I shouldn't call him a boy, a young person from Illinois who was part of the study, and part of his issue is communicating with others. He's very, very with it, but he literally has to force himself. And he said, just being in the study what was transformative because it forced him to step outside of his comfort zone. And I didn't make that up. He said that.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that because we talk about presence to belonging in one of the classes at the ARC and talk about how the first time you walk into a new space, you're not going to feel comfortable and that we can't judge people that way. We have to give them time to observe, time to sit back and take it all in and figure out whether it's a space they want to be in. And only at that point do we even want to engage in interaction. And only after interacting might you determine that this is a place for you to be and be involved on a regular basis. So it's such a process.
You're describing exactly what another participant said about her experience as a person um, with autism. She has to really think about her space, right? And it has to be a certain way for her to be as successful as she can be. And she's an editor, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, but it's all about physical and emotional attitudinal space. If that makes sense.
It does. We have a pre-submitted question that's a little bit of a veering off, but I think it'll be an interesting question for you to ponder. I think it's from a direct support person.
Hmm.
It says, how does one reinvent themselves when they've lost the drive to supervise individuals?
I taught the same classes for 7 years, right? And they're long classes. They're 2.5 hours long, right? So towards the middle to end, I was like really having to talk myself into this thing. Um, but but I thought about what I thought about to get me to class was like what was happening, what kind of bridge I could build for my students, right? And even though I did not always want to be there, right? Um, once I was there and had talked to myself in that way, but it's about, I think, really changing your script. Like, what are you doing as a support professional? Like, what are you doing as a manager of support professionals, you're building something like that support system is so important, right? It can change the lives of people, both the person being supported and the supporter, right? And it's not always easy. It can be a pain in the rump, right? But it's that, just remembering that um you um retooling how your script plays in your head is so important. So part of space in my research is about psychology, right? So space doesn't just refer to, so space experience and support were the key things that came out of the study. Space experience and support. And um, space means both psychological space and physical space. And they can go together and they can also be held separate. It's called proberium in Dutch. And we need that. We need that space. And um, what you can do is define the space psychologically for yourself. I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, I think it was a great answer. Whether that's what they're looking for, I don't know. But you drifted into this area talking about space, and so as I understand what you're saying, your ability to write the story you want and be self-determined, that one of the elements you need is this physical and psychological space to figure out who you are.
That's
And
right.
I truly do believe that. And so the final question I want to ask is says, if I could do one thing as a parent leaving this workshop, what should it be? And what about as a sibling?
Give choices. Choices, choices, choices. Even when we're like, this is gonna screw everything up, right? They might throw a fit. It might not go well.
Mhm.
Those choices are important.
Yeah, I think that when you're really young, starting off with a choice between two things is a choice.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
building to decision making so that people know all the choices or a large number of choices and they have to choose between them. So there is a path towards doing that that becomes more complex. So, but it's never too late.
And
If
then,
your family member is 60, they can still start to choose more opportunities.
yeah, the literature says, the big we, says that this is true across the life course, not just when you're 6, not just when you're 11. It's true across the life course.
Yeah, I believe that. I'll tell you, as a 65-year-old, I am still writing chapters. So I believe
The
that to be true.
Dalai Lama says we do that till our last breath. So,
If you're really living a good life, I believe that's the
that's
case.
right. Yeah.
I just can't thank you enough for coming and talking about this. Chris is going to continue this work. He's going to help us figure out how to build these skills for people that have disabilities and the people that support them. And if you're interested in this topic, please connect back with the ARC. We have some caregiver support groups that address how to be a better advisor instead of caregiver. We have some dignity of risk trainings that we'd love to share with you. So thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. Dr. Worth, you never disappoint.
And thanks for having me.